The entire dining room went dead silent. Crystal stopped clinking. Forks hovered mid-air. The only sound that dared to exist was the violent, rhythmic trembling of two infant bodies shaking in their father's arms. But these weren't just any babies. These were the twin heirs to the Gambino crime syndicate. And the man holding them, tattooed, 6'4", wrapped in a bespoke suit, looked like he was 5 seconds away from executing every person in the room just to make the shaking stop. His guards had already cleared a 10-foot perimeter. The maitre d' was white as a ghost. Diners pressed themselves against the walls. No one dared even breathe. No one, except for a 26-year-old waitress with $47,000 in medical debt and nothing left to lose. Natasha Reynolds walked straight past the armed guards, locked eyes with the most dangerous man in New York, and raised her hand. Not in surrender. In a slow, deliberate conducting motion. 3 beats, fingers snapping in triplet rhythm like a metronome made of bone and defiance. The twins' eyes snapped to her hand. Their shaking stopped. The room gasped. Simon Gambino stared at her like she'd just raised the dead. But Natasha had no idea that calming the babies was the easy part. Surviving the man who now owned her? That was going to be impossible. Before we begin, tell me where you are listening from in the comments, and also subscribe for more stories like this. Simon Gambino didn't ask questions in public. So when he slid a black American Express card across the white tablecloth and told the trembling manager to close the restaurant immediately, it wasn't a request. It was a coronation of new ownership. Within 8 minutes, every diner had been ushered out with profuse apologies and complimentary vouchers they'd never use. The kitchen staff evaporated like smoke. Even the guards retreated to the perimeter, though Natasha could feel their eyes on her through the frosted glass, like wolves watching a rabbit that had wandered too close to the den. Now it was just her, the man who could make people disappear, and 2 sleeping infants who had finally stopped shaking. "Sit," Simon said. It wasn't a suggestion. Natasha sat. Her hands were still trembling from the adrenaline, but she folded them in her lap where he couldn't see. She'd worked at Crestwood House long enough to recognize power when it walked through the door, but she'd never been this close to it. Close enough to see the faint scar cutting through his left eyebrow, close enough to smell cedar and gunpowder and something darker she couldn't name. "What's your name?" "Natasha Reynolds." "How did you do that?" He gestured to the twins, now sleeping peacefully in a custom double stroller that probably cost more than her car. She swallowed. The shaking wasn't fear. It was sensory overload. The lights, the noise, the stimulation. Their nervous systems couldn't regulate. The triplet rhythm creates a pattern their brains can follow. It's called rhythmic entrainment. Simon's eyes narrowed. "You a doctor?" "I was a music therapist. Neurologic music therapy, specifically. I worked with pediatric patients who had processing disorders." She didn't mention why she'd left. Didn't mention the little girl who'd coded during a session while Natasha hummed lullabies and held her hand. Was? Student loans don't pay themselves. Therapy positions don't exactly cover Manhattan rent. Something flickered across his face. Not quite sympathy. More like recognition. Like he understood what it meant to be buried by circumstances beyond your control. He leaned back, and Natasha noticed for the first time that he hadn't let go of the stroller handle. Even sitting, even interrogating her, his hand stayed connected to his son's. Their mother died 3 months ago. Overdose. The doctors said the babies were born dependent. They've been like this since. He stopped himself, jaw tightening. No one's been able to calm them. Not the nannies, not the specialists, No one. They need consistency, Natasha said quietly. Routine. A caregiver who understands that their bodies are constantly fighting invisible battles. It's not about stopping the shaking. It's about teaching them they're safe. Simon studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone, typed something, and slid it across the table. Natasha looked down at the screen. It was a contract. A salary number stared back at her. $250,000. Annual, plus housing, plus benefits. Her throat went dry. What is this? A job offer. You move into my penthouse tonight. You take care of my sons. You teach me how to do what you just did. His voice dropped, and suddenly the temperature in the room plummeted. And you don't ask questions about anything else you see or hear. Understood? Every rational cell in her body screamed to run. This man was dangerous. His world was dangerous. She'd be walking into a gilded cage with a predator who smiled with too many teeth. But then, she thought about the eviction notice taped to her apartment door. The collection agency calls she'd stopped answering. The way her hands shook every time she walked past the pediatric wing at Mount Sinai because she couldn't afford to finish her clinical hours. She thought about those two babies, trembling in the arms of a man who would kill for them, but didn't know how to soothe them. "I'll need access to a piano," she said. Simon's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile if it had reached his eyes. "Done. And I'm not a prisoner. If I stay, it's because I choose to, not because you own me." The smile sharpened into a blade. "We'll see about that." He stood, extending his hand. Natasha took it. His grip was warm, calloused, and absolutely unbreakable. "Welcome to the family, Miss Reynolds," Simon said. "My driver will take you to pack. You have 2 hours." She'd just shaken hands with the devil, and God help her, she was grateful for it. The penthouse occupied the entire 53rd floor of a building that didn't officially exist on any map. Natasha knew this because she'd tried to look it up during the car ride, and every search came back empty. Just a blank space in the skyline where steel and glass and secrets lived. The elevator required a fingerprint, a key card, and a 6-digit code. When the doors finally opened, Natasha stepped into a world that smelled like leather and money and something metallic she tried not to think about. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan like a kingdom awaiting orders. The furniture was all sharp angles and dark wood, art on the walls that was probably stolen from museums, and not a single photograph anywhere. It was beautiful in the way a mausoleum was beautiful, cold, untouchable, built to intimidate. "The nursery's this way," Simon said, leading her down a hallway lined with doors she suspected she'd never be allowed to open. He stopped at the last door on the right and pushed it open. Natasha's stomach dropped. The room was a bunker. That was the only word for it. Bulletproof glass windows, reinforced steel door with a deadbolt that belonged on a bank vault, and walls painted in clinical white that reminded her of hospitals and autopsies. 2 cribs sat in the center like afterthoughts, bare except for thin mattresses and monitoring equipment that blinked red and green in the darkness. No mobiles. No color. No warmth. "This is where you're keeping them." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. Simon's expression hardened. "This is where they're safe. This is where they're terrified." She stepped inside, running her hand along the cold wall. "Look at this place. It's a cell. You've built them a prison, and you're wondering why they can't stop shaking. Watch your mouth." His tone could have cut glass. "Or what? You'll fire me. Go ahead." She spun to face him, adrenaline overriding every survival instinct she had. "You hired me to help them, so let me help them. This room is sensory deprivation. They need texture, color, sound. They need protection. Simon moved closer, and suddenly the space between them felt like a live wire. There are people who would gut them just to send me a message. That glass is 3 inches thick. That door can withstand an RPG. This room keeps them alive. And miserable. Natasha held her ground, even though her heart was trying to punch through her ribs. You can have security and humanity at the same time, unless you want them to grow up thinking the world is a white box with cameras. Something flickered in his eyes. Anger, maybe. Or recognition. Then he reached for his hip. Natasha's breath stopped as he pulled out a Glock 19, black and efficient, and started to set it on the changing table next to a stack of diapers. Absolutely not. She moved before thinking, putting herself between him and the table. Simon froze. "Excuse me? You do not unholster a weapon within 10 feet of those cribs, ever. I don't care if the building's on fire." His jaw tightened. For 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Neither of them moved. The air pressure in the room changed. Natasha could feel the barely leashed violence in him, the part that had built an empire on fear and broken bones. "You're in my house," he said quietly, too quietly, "giving me orders. I'm doing my job." Her voice didn't shake. Small miracle. "You want me to teach you how to keep them calm? Step 1. Stop treating this nursery like an armory. They can smell the gun oil. They can feel your tension. Every time you walk in here ready for war, you're telling them the world isn't safe. The world isn't safe. Then teach them how to survive it. Don't teach them to be afraid of their own father." The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Simon stared at her. Then, slowly, deliberately, he holstered the weapon and took 2 steps back from the cribs. "Anything else? Miss Reynolds?" "Paint the walls blue. Buy soft blankets. Get a white noise machine, and stop looking at them like they're a liability." His expression was unreadable. "They cost me the woman I loved. They've made me a target. And now they've brought a mouthy therapist into my home who doesn't know when to shut up." He moved to the door, paused. "But you're right. They deserve better than this." He left without another word. Natasha exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. She'd just won a battle, but the war had only started. The twins were named Luca and Marco, though Simon said the names like prayers he didn't believe in anymore. Natasha learned this at 3 in the morning, when one of them woke up screaming, and she found Simon standing in the hallway, fully dressed, staring at the nursery door like it was the gates of hell. "You going to help or just stand there?" she asked, brushing past him. He followed her inside, watched as she lifted Luca, or maybe Marco, she was still learning to tell them apart, and held him against her chest, her hand tapping a steady rhythm against his back. 1-2, 1-2, 60 beats per minute, the exact tempo of a resting human heart. The crying stopped within 30 seconds. Simon looked at her like she'd performed surgery with her bare hands. "It's not magic," Natasha said, settling into the rocking chair she'd had delivered that afternoon. "It's biology. Their nervous systems are dysregulated because of the prenatal drug exposure. They're constantly in fight-or-flight mode. The heartbeat rhythm tells their bodies they're safe. That someone's alive and holding them. Show me. I am showing you. No." He stepped closer. "Teach me. I need to be able to do this." There was something raw in his voice, something that sounded like desperation, wrapped in pride, wrapped in steel. Natasha stood, still holding Luca, and gestured to the chair. "Sit." Simon sat. For a man who probably hadn't taken orders in a decade, he obeyed with surprising grace. "Hold out your arms." He did. Natasha carefully transferred Luca into his father's grip, watching as Simon's entire body went rigid with tension. The baby immediately started to whimper. "Relax," she said. "I am relaxed. You're holding him like a grenade. He can feel your stress." She moved behind the chair, leaning over Simon's shoulder. Close enough to smell cedar and coffee and the faint scent of gunpowder that seemed to live in his clothes. "Breathe, in through your nose, out through your mouth." Simon exhaled slowly. The whimpering quieted. "Good. Now." Natasha reached around and placed her hand over his, guiding it to Luca's back. "Tap, like this. 1, 2, 1, 2. Feel my rhythm." His hand was warm beneath hers, calloused, larger than she'd expected. She could feel his pulse through his wrist, too fast, like his body was at war with the gentleness she was asking of him. 1, 2, she whispered, tapping the rhythm against his knuckles. "Match my tempo. Don't think. Just feel." Simon's hand began to move, hesitant at first, then steadier. 1, 2. 1, 2. The same rhythm she'd used in the restaurant, the same pattern that had stopped the shaking. Luca's eyes fluttered closed. Natasha felt Simon's entire body shift beneath her. The tension drained out of his shoulders. His breathing deepened, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked almost peaceful. "He's asleep," Simon said, voice rough. "You did that." Natasha started to pull her hand away, but Simon's fingers closed over hers. Not forcefully, almost carefully. "Don't." She froze, her hand trapped beneath his, both of them touching the sleeping baby, the space between them suddenly charged with something that had nothing to do with childcare. "I haven't been able to hold them without them crying since the day they were born," Simon said quietly. "The nurses had to pry them out of my arms at the hospital because I was making it worse. I thought..." He stopped, swallowed. "I thought they knew. That I was the reason their mother was gone." Natasha's throat tightened. "That's not how babies work, isn't it?" He turned his head slightly, and suddenly his face was inches from hers. This close, she could see the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes, the grief he wore like a second skin. "Everything I touch breaks, Miss Reynolds. Everyone I love ends up dead or destroyed. Why would they be different?" "Because you're learning," she whispered. "Because you're here at 3 in the morning, asking me to teach you. Because you care enough to try." Something shifted in his expression. His free hand came up slowly, deliberately, and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek for half a heartbeat too long. "You're dangerous," he said. "I'm a waitress with student debt." "No." His thumb traced her jawline, and Natasha's breath caught. "You walked into a room full of armed men and told me what to do. You rebuilt a nursery in 24 hours. You're teaching me how to be human again." His voice dropped. "That's the most dangerous thing anyone's ever done to me." Natasha should have stepped back, should have reminded him about professional boundaries and the fact that he was a crime lord and she was only here for the babies. Instead, she stayed perfectly still, her hand beneath his, the sleeping infant between them like a heartbeat made flesh. 1, 2, she whispered. Simon smiled, actually smiled. 1, 2. The metronome kept ticking. Natasha had learned the penthouse's rhythms quickly. Simon left at dawn and returned at unpredictable hours. The guards changed shifts at 6 and midnight. The chef arrived at 8, and somewhere around 2 in the morning, the entire 53rd floor fell into a silence so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. That's when she usually raided the kitchen. Tonight was no different. Luca had drained his bottle and was already fussing for more. So she slipped out of the nursery in her sleep shirt and bare feet, padding down the hallway like a ghost. The kitchen was at the far end of the penthouse, past Simon's office, past the library she wasn't supposed to enter, past doors that stayed locked even during the day. She was halfway there when she heard voices, low, urgent, coming from behind a door that was cracked open just enough to leak light into the hallway. Natasha froze. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around. Go back to the nursery, pretend she'd heard nothing. But the voices were talking about the babies. She pressed herself against the wall and inched closer. Weakness in the nursery, a man was saying. Not Simon. Someone else. The voice was sharp, efficient, American accented, but with something harder underneath. 2 infants, no security protocols, just a girl with a music degree playing mother. Simon's not stupid. A second voice, deeper, cold as a meat locker. He'll have measures in place. Simon's distracted. The babies have made him soft. He's delegating territory decisions to his underbosses, missing collections meetings, turning down contracts because he doesn't want to be away overnight. The first man laughed, bitter. The old man would have drowned them the day they were born. Natasha's blood turned to ice. So what are you proposing, Marco? Marco. The name detonated in her brain like a shaped charge. She'd met him once, briefly, the day after she'd arrived. Simon's right hand, his capo, a man built like a bulldozer, with eyes that assessed everything and revealed nothing. He'd looked at her the way someone might look at a stray dog that had wandered into a business meeting. I'm proposing we give the Volkov family exactly what they want, Marco said. Access. You want to hand them the heirs to the Gambino syndicate? The second voice sounded incredulous. Simon would gut you alive. Simon won't know until it's done. We stage it right, make it look like a breach, like the Volkovs found a weakness in our security. They take the twins. Simon goes to war like he should have done 6 months ago, instead of playing house with a waitress. And when the dust settles, we've eliminated our competition, and Simon remembers why he built this empire in the first place. And if the babies don't survive? Silence, the kind that answered every question without words. They're already damaged goods, Marco finally said. Drug babies, weak genetics. The syndicate doesn't need heirs who shake when someone raises their voice. Better to start over. Find Simon a proper woman. Build a legacy that doesn't scream itself awake every 3 hours. Natasha's hand flew to her mouth to stop the sound that wanted to escape. Rage, pure, white-hot rage that made her vision blur at the edges. When? The second voice asked. Saturday night. Simon's meeting with the commission in Queens. He'll be gone for at least 4 hours. The girl puts the babies down around 8. We cut the cameras at 8:30, let the Volkovs in through the service entrance, and by the time Simon gets home, it's already over. And the therapist? Collateral damage. Volkovs can do what they want with her. Honestly, she's probably more dangerous than the babies. Simon listens to her. That ends Saturday. Natasha's legs were shaking. She needed to move, needed to get back to the nursery, lock the door, grab her phone and what? Call Simon. Tell him his most trusted lieutenant was planning to murder his children? Would he even believe her? She'd been here less than 2 weeks. Marco had been at his side for years. She took 1 step backward, then another. The floorboard creaked. The conversation inside stopped instantly. Did you hear that? Natasha ran. Didn't think, didn't plan. Just turned and sprinted down the hallway on silent feet, her heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs would crack. She made it to the nursery, slipped inside, and locked the deadbolt with trembling hands. Both twins were asleep in their cribs, innocent, unaware that their own family had just signed their death warrants. Natasha leaned against the door, gasping for air, her mind racing through options that all ended badly. Saturday. She had 3 days to figure out how to stop a murder, and she couldn't tell a soul. Natasha waited until morning, rehearsed the words 100 times while she fed the twins, changed them, walked circles around the nursery like a caged animal planning escape routes. By the time Simon returned from wherever he'd been, she'd learned not to ask. She'd built a script that sounded rational, credible, something that wouldn't make her sound insane. She found him in his office, tie loosened, tumbler of whiskey already half empty, even though it wasn't yet noon. "We need to talk." He looked up from the paperwork spread across his desk. Something in her voice made him set down his pen. "What's wrong?" "Last night I went to get milk for Luca, and I heard—" She stopped, started again. "Someone in this house is planning to hurt the twins." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Who?" "Marco." The name tasted like poison. He was talking to someone about staging a breach, letting the Volkov family take the babies. He said you'd been distracted, that the twins made you weak, that— "Stop." Simon stood slowly, dangerously. "You're accusing my capo of treason." "I know how it sounds, but I heard him. Saturday night. When you're meeting with the commission, they're planning to— Marco has been with me for 12 years. His voice could have cut steel. He's saved my life, killed for me, bled for me. You've been here 2 weeks and you're telling me he's plotting against my children?" "Yes." Natasha stepped closer to the desk, desperate. "I know you trust him, but I heard what I heard. We need to move the twins somewhere safe. We need to—" The door opened behind her. Marco walked in like he owned the room, which, given the look on Simon's face, maybe he did. He was carrying something small and plastic, a Ziploc bag. "Boss, we have a problem." He didn't even glance at Natasha. "Found this in Miss Reynolds's room during the routine security sweep." He set the bag on Simon's desk. Natasha's stomach plummeted. Inside were pills, blue, white, unmistakable. "That's not mine." Her voice came out strangled. "Oxycodone," Marco said flatly. 30 milligrams. Found it in her nightstand, hidden under some books. Now he looked at her, and his eyes were empty. "You want to explain why you have Schedule 2 narcotics in a house with infant children?" "I don't— Those aren't—" Natasha turned to Simon, panic clawing up her throat. "He planted them. This is what I was trying to tell you. He's framing me so you won't believe—" "Stop talking." Simon's voice was arctic. He picked up the bag, held it to the light. "These are pharmaceutical grade. Where did you get them?" "I didn't." "Simon, please, you have to listen to me." "I pulled her background check," Marco interrupted, pulling out his phone. "She worked at Mount Sinai Pediatric Ward until 8 months ago. Left under unclear circumstances. There's a sealed incident report, and look at this." He showed Simon the screen. 3 separate prescriptions in her name from different doctors. Classic doctor shopping behavior. Natasha felt the walls closing in. "Those were for a patient I was helping a family navigate." "You're a music therapist," Marco said. "You can't write prescriptions, so either you were stealing them or you were manipulating doctors. Either way, you're an addict with access to vulnerable infants." "Simon." Natasha grabbed the edge of his desk, her knuckles white. "Look at me. You know me. You've watched me with Luca and Marco for 2 weeks. Have I ever seemed impaired? Ever missed a feeding? Ever put them in danger?" Something flickered in Simon's eyes. Doubt, or maybe just the dying ember of trust. She's been alone with your sons every night, Marco pressed. What if she nods off during a feeding? What if she's too high to hear them crying? Boss, this is exactly the kind of liability we can't afford. Simon's jaw worked. His hand tightened around the bag of pills until the plastic crinkled. When he finally spoke, his voice was empty. Marco, escort Miss Reynolds to her room. Lock the door from the outside. No, Natasha's voice cracked. Simon, please, it's for your safety. He still wouldn't look at her. Until I figure out what the hell is going on, you stay in your room. Someone else will care for the twins. They need me. They need someone who isn't a security risk. Finally his eyes met hers, and what she saw there was worse than anger. It was disappointment. I wanted to believe you were different. That you actually gave a damn about them. I do. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. And Saturday night, when Marco lets those men in and your sons disappear, you're going to remember this conversation. Marco's hand closed around her arm like a vice. Let's go, Miss Reynolds. She didn't fight, didn't scream. Let herself be marched down the hallway to her room like a prisoner, because what was the point? Simon had made his choice. 12 years of loyalty versus 2 weeks of miracles. The door locked behind her with a sound like a coffin closing. Natasha sat on the bed, staring at her hands, and started planning how to save 2 babies from inside a locked room. She had 48 hours. The screaming started at midnight. Natasha heard it through 2 walls and a locked door, the raw, desperate wails of infants whose nervous systems were tearing themselves apart. She pressed her hands against the door, every muscle in her body screaming to get to them, but the deadbolt held firm. Let me out! She pounded until her palms bruised. They need me. No one came. The crying escalated. Not just fussy baby crying. The kind of screaming that meant pain, that meant their bodies were failing them, that meant whoever was trying to calm them had no idea what they were doing. Natasha sank to the floor, forcing herself to breathe through the panic. Think. What would cause them to regress this badly? She'd been locked up for 16 hours. They'd had bottles, been changed, should have been fine with basic care, unless the person caring for them was radiating stress like a nuclear reactor, unless that person was Simon. The screaming stopped abruptly around 1 a.m., not the gentle fade of babies soothed back to sleep, the sudden silence of complete exhaustion. Natasha knew that sound. She'd heard it in the pediatric ward when babies cried themselves into a state beyond comfort. Footsteps in the hallway, heavy, uneven. The deadbolt scraped. The door opened. Simon stood there looking like he'd aged 10 years. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his hair disheveled, his hands shaking. Show me again. Unlock the door first. I did, all the way. No guards outside. No conditions. She stood, meeting his bloodshot eyes. You want my help? You trust me or you don't. Choose. He stepped back, waved off whoever was in the hallway. It's done. Now help me before I lose my mind. Natasha pushed past him and ran to the nursery. Both twins were in their cribs. Faces red and blotchy, bodies limp with exhaustion, still trembling, still caught in that horrible feedback loop where their nervous systems couldn't find equilibrium. She scooped up Luca first, started the rhythm immediately. 1-2. 1-2. He latched onto it within seconds, his breathing synchronizing with her heartbeat. How are you doing that? Simon's voice cracked. I tried. I did exactly what you showed me. The tapping, the rhythm, everything. They just screamed harder. Because you're terrified. Natasha reached for Marco, the baby, not the traitor, and positioned him against her other shoulder, maintaining the dual rhythm. They can feel your fear, your anger. It feeds their dysregulation. I'm not angry. You're furious. She looked at him over the twins' heads. At me, at yourself, at the situation, and they know it. Your heart rate is probably 140 right now. You're tapping the rhythm, but your body's screaming danger. It doesn't work. Simon slumped against the wall, dragging a hand down his face. Marco said you were high, that you were a liability. I watched him pull those pills out of your nightstand myself. Did you watch him find them? Or did he just walk in already holding the bag? Silence. Simon, when have you ever seen me impaired? When have I ever given you reason to think I'd endanger them? You accused my most trusted man of planning to murder my children. But his voice had lost its edge. What was I supposed to think? That maybe I was telling the truth. Natasha settled into the rocking chair, both babies finally breathing steadily. Look at that bag. Actually look at it. Simon pulled it from his pocket, held it up to the light. See the seal? The top edge where it's supposed to be factory closed? He squinted. It's torn. Not torn. Cut. Clean line. That's not how you open a prescription bottle and transfer pills. That's how you open a bag that was sealed as evidence. She kept her voice level, factual. Now think about who in this house carries a tactical knife with a serrated edge designed for cutting zip ties and evidence bags. She watched his face change, watched the pieces fall into place. Marco carries a Benchmade, police issue. The same knife that left that cut pattern. I worked with enough law enforcement in the pediatric ward to recognize it. The babies were fully asleep now, their bodies finally trusting that safety had returned. He needed to discredit me before Saturday. Make sure that when I tried to warn you, you'd write it off as an addict's paranoia. Simon's hands clenched into fists. If you're lying to me, I'm not, and you know I'm not, because your sons are asleep for the first time in 16 hours, and the only thing that changed is that I'm back in this room. She met his eyes. Saturday night. 4 hours. That's all they need. Are you willing to bet your children's lives that I'm wrong? He stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and typed something. What are you doing? Telling Marco I'm cancelling the commission meeting. Simon's voice was stone. And that I want to review all security protocols for the nursery. With him. Personally. He'll know you suspect something. Good. Simon's smile was a blade in the dark. Let him sweat. He moved to the door, paused. Natasha. If you're right about this, I am. Then you just saved their lives twice. He looked back at the sleeping twins. I won't forget that. The door closed behind him. Natasha held the babies tighter and started counting down the hours until Saturday. The power went out at 8:47 p.m. Natasha knew the exact time because she'd been watching the clock like it held her death sentence, counting down the minutes until Saturday crossed over into Sunday, and maybe, just maybe, they'd be safe. The lights died. The baby monitors went dark. Even the ever-present hum of the HVAC system cut out, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like the building was holding its breath. Then the emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the penthouse in blood red. Simon appeared in the nursery doorway 5 seconds later, gun already drawn. Phone pressed to his ear. Marco's not answering. Neither are 3 guards on the perimeter. His voice was surgical calm, but his eyes were ice and murder. We're compromised. Natasha's heart launched into her throat. She was already lifting Luca from his crib, reaching for his brother. How many? Don't know. Could be 2, could be 20. He grabbed the diaper bag she'd packed, threw it over his shoulder. There's a room 2 doors down, soundproofed, reinforced. It'll buy us time. Us? You and the twins. Move. Now. She ran. Barefoot, twins clutched against her chest, following Simon down the hallway that felt like it had stretched into miles. Every shadow looked like a man with a gun. Every sound could have been footsteps. Simon stopped at a door that looked like all the others. Dark wood, brass handle, completely unremarkable. He punched a code into a hidden keypad, and the lock disengaged with a heavy click. The room beyond was smaller than the nursery. Piano in the corner, acoustic panels on every wall, no windows. A panic room disguised as a music studio. Get in! Lock it behind me. Don't open it for anyone except me. You understand? He was already turning back toward the hallway. Wait! Natasha grabbed his arm. You're going out there alone. I've handled worse. But something flickered in his expression. Something that looked almost like fear. Not for himself. Keep them quiet. No matter what you hear. Keep them silent. Simon. He cupped her face with his free hand, thumb brushing her cheekbone. The gesture was fast, almost violent in its tenderness. If I don't come back, there's a phone in the piano bench. Speed dial 1. Tell them the twins need extraction. Then he was gone, swallowed by red-lit shadows and whatever violence waited in the dark. Natasha locked the door with shaking hands. The twins were already starting to fuss, picking up on her terror. She sat on the floor, back against the wall, and started the rhythm. 1, 2. 1, 2. Praying it would be enough. For 3 minutes, there was nothing. Just the sound of her own breathing and the soft coos of the babies as they settled against her chest. Then gunfire exploded somewhere in the penthouse. Not the clean, suppressed pops from movies. Real gunfire. Deafening, even through soundproofed walls. 3 shots. 5. A full magazine emptying in rapid succession. The twins' eyes went wide. Natasha pressed them tighter against her, humming low in her throat. Maintaining the rhythm even as her whole body wanted to shake apart. More gunfire. Closer now. Just outside the door, maybe? Or in the hallway, impossible to tell. Shouting in a language she didn't recognize. Russian, maybe. The sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Please let it not be Simon, please! Glass shattered. Someone screamed, a man's voice, high and terrified, and then suddenly cut off. More shots. The tactical precision of Simon's Glock versus the spray of automatic weapons. Luca started to cry. Shh, baby, shh. Natasha rocked him, tapping the rhythm against his back, but the soundproofing worked both ways. The battle outside was muffled, but present, and the babies could feel the vibrations through the floor. I've got you. You're safe. I've got you. A body slammed against the music room door, hard enough to rattle the frame. Natasha stopped breathing. The handle jiggled. Once, twice. Someone testing to see if it was locked. She looked around for anything she could use as a weapon. The piano bench, a music stand, nothing that would stop a man with a gun. The jiggling stopped. Footsteps retreated. Then Simon's voice, cold and flat. Wrong room. 2 shots. The wet sound of something hitting the floor. Natasha closed her eyes and kept humming, kept rocking, kept pretending that the man she was falling for wasn't executing people 10 feet away from where she sat with his children. The gunfire continued for another 4 minutes, an eternity measured in heartbeats and prayers. Then silence. Real silence this time, heavy and complete. Natasha waited, counting her breaths. The twins somehow still calm in her arms because she refused to let them feel her terror. A knock on the door. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Natasha. It's me. It's over. She recognized his voice but didn't move. How do I know it's really you? 1, 2, Simon said through the door. The rhythm. That's how you taught me. 1, 2. Her hands shook as she unlocked the door. Simon stood in the hallway covered in blood that wasn't his. His shirt was torn, his knuckles split, his eyes dark with the kind of violence that couldn't be unseen. 4 bodies lay in the hallway behind him. Marco, she whispered. Ran when the shooting started. Simon's voice was empty. He'll wish he'd died here when I find him. He looked at the twins in her arms, still calm, still trusting. Something cracked in his expression. Get them out of here, Natasha said. Away from this. They can't see. I know. He reached for Luca, and despite everything, despite the blood and death, his hands were gentle. I know. Simon had been gone for less than 90 seconds when Natasha heard it. The scrape of metal on metal. Slow. Deliberate. Someone picking the lock from the outside. Her blood turned to ice. She'd moved the twins to the floor behind the piano, the only cover in the room, and was crouched over them like a shield made of flesh and desperation. The rhythm had kept them calm through the gunfire. But now her heart was hammering too hard to maintain it. The lock clicked. The door swung open. The man who entered was built like a truck. Tactical vest strapped with ammunition, assault rifle sweeping the room with professional efficiency. He spotted her immediately. His eyes were flat, dead. This wasn't personal for him. This was a job. He raised the rifle. Wait. Natasha's voice came out steady, somehow. You're here for them, right? The babies? Let me move. I'm just the help. I don't matter. The mercenary's finger moved to the trigger. You matter enough to die. Natasha's hand closed around the tuning fork she'd left on the piano during yesterday's session. Medical grade. 4096. Hertz. The highest frequency she owned, originally designed for neurological testing. She struck it against the piano's edge and jammed it directly into the microphone input of the speaker system Simon had installed when she'd demanded music equipment. The sound that erupted was unholy, a high-frequency shriek that bypassed the ears and went straight into the brain like an ice pick through the skull. The kind of sound that triggered immediate physical pain, disorientation, nausea. The mercenary's hands flew to his ears, rifle dropping, his face contorting in agony. Natasha didn't think. She grabbed the piano bench, solid oak, 20 pounds, and swung it like a baseball bat into his knees. He went down hard. The rifle clattered across the floor. Natasha kicked it away, keeping the tuning fork pressed to the microphone, maintaining that awful, piercing wail. The mercenary was on the ground, trying to get up, blood streaming from his nose where the frequency had ruptured something delicate. She heard footsteps pounding down the hallway. "Simon!" Her voice barely carried over the sound. The mercenary's hand found his belt, pulled a knife. Even half blind with pain, he was trained enough to be lethal. He lunged. Natasha twisted away, but not fast enough. The blade caught her shoulder, a line of fire that made her vision white out for a second. She fell backward, the tuning fork finally separating from the microphone. The terrible sound stopped. The mercenary rose, knife raised, and then Simon was there. He came through the door like a force of nature. No hesitation, no mercy. Grabbed the mercenary's knife hand mid-swing and twisted until something snapped. The man screamed. Simon's other hand closed around his throat and slammed him into the wall so hard the acoustic panels cracked. "You touched her." Simon's voice was a whisper. Somehow that was more terrifying than shouting. "You made her bleed." "Simon, don't—" Natasha started, but the words died as she watched his face. There was nothing human in it, just cold, precise rage. The mercenary tried to fight, threw a punch that Simon absorbed without flinching, tried to knee him in the groin. Simon caught his leg and used it as leverage to drive him into the floor. The sound of the impact was sickening. Simon hit him. Once, twice. Kept hitting him until the struggling stopped, until there was nothing left but meat and bone, and the wet sound of fists meeting flesh. "Simon, he's done. Stop." Natasha's voice finally broke through. Simon froze, fist raised, looked down at what he'd done, then at her, bleeding on the floor, one hand pressed against her shoulder. "Natasha!" He scrambled toward her, hands already reaching, then stopped when he saw them covered in blood. "Christ, how bad is it?" "Shallow. Hurts like hell, but I'll live." She was already checking the twins, who were somehow still calm behind the piano. The tuning fork frequency hadn't affected them, too high for their developing auditory range. Small miracles. Are there more? No, that was the last one. Simon pulled off his shirt, pressed it against her wound. His hands were shaking. "You used the speakers as a weapon. You gave me a soundproof room and a PA system. I worked with what I had." She winced as he applied pressure. "You're bleeding too." He looked down like he'd forgotten. There was a gash across his ribs, deep enough that she could see muscle. "Got clipped on the stairs. It's nothing." "That's not nothing. You need stitches." Later. He cupped her face with bloody hands, searching her eyes. "You could have hidden, could have stayed behind the piano with them and waited for me. Why did you fight?" "Because he would have killed all three of us." She covered his hands with hers. "Because someone had to." Something shifted in his expression. That careful control he always maintained cracked completely, and what she saw beneath was raw and desperate and completely unguarded. "I can't lose you." His forehead pressed against hers. "I can't lose any of you. Do you understand? I can't." "You didn't." She kissed him. Didn't plan it. Didn't think about the blood or the violence or the bodies in the hallway. Just pulled him closer and kissed him like they weren't broken and bleeding on the floor of a crime scene. "We're alive, all of us." Simon kissed her back like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. Behind them, one of the twins started to cry. They broke apart, both reaching for the sound, even now, even in this. Family. 3 weeks later, the penthouse looked different. The nursery walls were painted soft blue, like Natasha had demanded that first day. Mobiles hung from the ceiling, casting gentle shadows. The bulletproof glass was still there. Some realities didn't change, but now there were curtains to soften it. Texture, color, life. The rest of the penthouse had changed too, in ways harder to quantify. The doors stayed open more. Light came in. Simon smiled occasionally, and when he did, it reached his eyes. Marco's body had been found in the East River 2 days after the siege. Simon hadn't said a word about it, and Natasha hadn't asked. Some questions had answers that didn't need speaking. Now she sat in the music room, her music room, Simon had started calling it, playing Debussy while the twins did tummy time on a blanket nearby. They were getting stronger. The shaking had decreased to occasional tremors, usually only when they were overtired. They tracked movement better, smiled more. Luca had laughed for the first time yesterday, and Simon had looked at him like he'd witnessed a miracle. The piano was mid-phrase when she sensed him in the doorway. She'd learned to feel his presence, the way the air pressure changed when he entered a room. "Don't stop," Simon said. "I like listening." She continued playing, watching him in her peripheral vision as he moved to the blanket and lowered himself down beside his sons. He'd healed quickly from the knife wound. Apparently getting stabbed was an occupational hazard he'd learned to recover from efficiently. The only evidence now was a new scar across his ribs to match all the others. He picked up Marco, the baby, who Natasha had started calling Little Marco to avoid the mental association with the traitor, and held him against his chest. 1-2. 1-2. The rhythm had become second nature to him now. "I have something for you," Simon said when the piece ended. Natasha turned on the bench. "If it's another obscenely expensive piece of equipment, I already have everything I need." "It's not equipment." He shifted little Marco to one arm and pulled something from his pocket. The contract. The same one he'd slid across the table at Crestwood House a lifetime ago. "I'm terminating your employment." Her heart stopped. "What?" "You're fired, Miss Reynolds." He held the paper up and tore it cleanly in half, then quarters. Let the pieces fall like snow. "Effective immediately." "Simon, I don't understand. The contract was wrong from the beginning." He stood, still holding little Marco, and moved toward her. "I hired you as an employee, gave you a salary and a job description, like you were just another person on the payroll. But you're not." Natasha stood too, her legs unsteady. "Then what am I?" "You're the woman who walked into gunfire for my children, who fought a mercenary with a tuning fork, who rebuilt this family from the ground up with nothing but rhythm and stubborn refusal to let us stay broken." He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the vulnerability in his eyes. "You're not the help, Natasha. You never were." He shifted little Marco to his other arm and reached into his pocket again. This time, what he pulled out made her breath catch. A ring. Simple platinum band with a single diamond. Nothing ostentatious. Perfect. "I'm asking you to stay," Simon said quietly. "Not as an employee, not as hired help, as my partner, as their mother, as the matriarch of this family." His voice roughened. "As my wife." Natasha's vision blurred. "You're proposing to me?" "I'm telling you I can't do this without you, that I don't want to, that these boys need you and I—" He stopped, started again. "I love you. I don't know when it happened. Maybe when you yelled at me about the gun in the nursery. Maybe when you taught me how to hold them without them crying. Maybe when you stood between them and a man with a rifle." He took her hand. "But I know I love you, and I'm asking you to choose this. Choose us." The twins chose that moment to make identical cooing sounds from the blanket, like they were voting. Natasha laughed through tears. "That's not fair. You're using the babies as props." "I'm using every advantage I have." Simon's thumb traced her ring finger. "Is it working?" She looked at him. This man who had been a stranger, holding screaming infants in a restaurant, who had become someone she couldn't imagine her life without, who had learned gentleness for his sons and opened his fortress for her, who had killed to protect them and would kill again without hesitation. She looked at the twins, Luca and little Marco, who had stopped shaking when she held them, who smiled when she sang, who were becoming whole despite the trauma they'd been born into. She looked at the ring, simple and perfect, and thought about the woman she'd been 2 months ago. Broke, alone, running from debt and grief and the ghost of a little girl she couldn't save. That woman had walked into Crestwood House expecting another shift serving rich people who didn't see her. This woman was being offered a family. "Yes." The word came out steadier than she expected. "Yes, I'll stay." Simon slid the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her, Little Marco squeezed safely between them, the baby making protesting sounds that might have been annoyance or approval. When they finally broke apart, Luca had rolled himself over on the blanket and was staring up at them with wide eyes. "Show off," Simon muttered, but he was smiling as he scooped him up too, both twins in his tattooed arms, sleeping against his chest, trusting him completely. Natasha leaned against his shoulder, studying the ring on her finger, and thought about rhythm. How everything in life came down to finding the right tempo. The right pattern. The space between beats where healing happened. 1, 2, she whispered. Simon kissed the top of her head. 1, 2. The metronome kept ticking, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Natasha felt like she was home.